The woman was standing at my cabin's front porch like she owned the damn place. "Excuse me," she barked, arms crossed, platinum hair stiff as lacquered straw. "You're trespassing. This is private property." I blinked, still holding the crate of firewood. "I know," I said. "It's my property." She scoffed like I just claimed to own the moon. "That's not possible. This cabin belongs to the Pine Hollow HOA. I'm Vanessa Cartwright, president. And you are Andrew Mallory," I said, setting the crate down slowly. "Owner of this land." "Since 1988, her eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. This lot is part of the HOA. You're not on our registry. You're squatting." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Squatting? Lady, I built this place with my father. I've got the deed, the survey maps, and probably 100 photos of me as a kid riding dirt bikes through these hills. You sure you're in the right place?" She pulled a phone from her handbag like it was a badge. "I'm calling security." "Go ahead," I said, stepping onto the porch. "Want me to call the sheriff too? He's been fishing with me up here." She flinched at that, but she was too deep into her performance to back down. "I'll be reporting you for trespassing and illegal structure maintenance on a restricted lot. This entire area was annexed by the HOA last year." "It's under our oversight." I stared at her. "You think the HOA can just annex a ranch?" She blinked. "Of course, it's part of our expansion plan." That's when I knew I was dealing with one of those HOAs, the kind that acted like a country club with a god complex. I hadn't been up here in a year, but I kept the taxes paid, and the land was still mine no matter how many board meetings they held in their laminated little circles. I stepped inside the cabin, grabbed my folder from the kitchen drawer, and came back out. "Here," I said, handing over the original deed, dated and notarized. "Read it and tell me who's trespassing." Vanessa barely looked at it. "This means nothing. The HOA has final authority. I'll be back with our legal officer." She spun on her heel and stormed down the trail like she'd just won something. I watched her disappear into the trees, then walked around back, flipped on the motion cameras I'd installed last summer, and put on a fresh pot of coffee. If she wanted a fight, she'd get one, but she had no idea who she was messing with. The next morning, I woke to the low rumble of a diesel engine grinding up the gravel access road. I was halfway through splitting a log out back when the noise cut off, and I heard multiple doors slam in rapid succession. 3 vehicles, 2 black SUVs, and a silver sedan stood parked in the clearing. From behind the trees, voices carried. Clipped, officious tones layered with that unmistakable air of bureaucratic confidence. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped around the cabin just in time to see Vanessa again, this time flanked by 2 men in suits and a thin man in khakis and a fleece vest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "There he is," she said, pointing like I was a stain on her carpet. "That's the one I told you about." The taller of the 2 suited men, square-jawed, early 50s, and already irritated, strode toward me, extending a hand like this was a friendly visit. "Mr. Mallory, I'm Richard Halbrook, legal advisor to the Pine Hollow HOA. "May we have a word?" "Already having one," I said, not shaking. "Make it count." "Right." He cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the status of this property. There's been a jurisdictional shift involving zoning authority and community boundaries. It's our position that this parcel now falls under Pine Hollow governance." I folded my arms. "You brought a real estate lawyer to tell me my private land got swallowed up by a neighborhood committee." Richard glanced back at Vanessa, who was already scanning the tree line like she expected reinforcements. "According to county maps updated last September," he continued, "this area was reclassified as part of the extended development corridor. The HOA received provisional authority to oversee compliance and integration efforts. That includes existing structures." I pulled a folded document from my back pocket, last month's property tax receipt, stamped and sealed by the county. Richard took it reluctantly. His eyes scanned it, jaw tightening as he read. "Still listed as unincorporated," I said. Still taxed as private land, and nowhere does it say HOA anything. The man in the fleece vest finally stepped forward. I'm Alan Givens, County Zoning Office. I'd like to clarify a few things if I may. Vanessa's face twitched like she just tasted vinegar. Richard stepped aside. There was an application filed by Pine Hollow HOA to expand their management zone, Alan said, adjusting his glasses. But the county denied the motion. Your parcel's designation hasn't changed. It's still sovereign land, not subject to HOA oversight. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to Richard, who suddenly found something fascinating about the dirt. You heard him, I said. Now, unless you brought breakfast or a building permit signed by God himself, I suggest you take your clipboard parade elsewhere. Alan spoke again, voice cautious. Mr. Mallory, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a quick look at your boundary markers. Just to confirm everything lines up with the registry. Of course, I said, already walking toward the tree line. South markers a metal post next to the old cattle gate, been there since '92. They followed me through the brush, shoes crunching pine needles. When we reached the post, Alan pulled out a handheld GPS unit and squatted beside the marker. Vanessa stayed back, arms stiff at her sides, visibly fuming. Matches exactly, Alan said. Coordinates align with county records down to the decimal. Vanessa snapped. There must be a mistake. Our maps are not legally binding, Alan said calmly. Only the county registry determines jurisdiction. Richard tapped her shoulder, murmured something sharp and low. She jerked away from him. Back at the cabin, Alan handed me a copy of his field report. Keep that, just in case this comes up again. That likely? I asked. He exhaled. Let's just say this isn't the first time Pine Hollows tried to reinterpret maps. As they retreated to their vehicles, Vanessa stayed behind a beat too long. I watched her jaw flex before she turned, heels stabbing into the earth like she wanted to break it. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 nights later, I came back from town with groceries and found the locks changed. The front door handle had been swapped for a cheap brass one, and a paper notice was stapled dead center of the wood. Property condemned, unsafe structure, entry prohibited. I stood there for a full minute, rain dripping from my jacket, trying to process the audacity. Inside, the lights were on. I walked around back, keyed in the override code to the security panel I'd installed in the crawlspace last year, and slipped through the side entrance. The place had been rifled through, drawers open, furniture shifted, even the old hunting rifle missing from above the mantel. I checked the cameras. All 4 exterior feeds had been disabled. But they'd missed the trail cam out by the generator shed. I pulled the footage. There, time-stamped at 3 in the morning, were 2 figures in hooded jackets using bolt cutters on my lock. One of them moved like a man used to hiding behind paperwork. The other had the stiff, mechanical posture of someone terrified of being caught. I copied the footage to a flash drive and drove straight to the sheriff's station. Sheriff Dalton reviewed the clip twice without saying a word. Then he leaned back, arms folded. That's a felony, he said. Breaking and entering, criminal mischief, possibly even burglary depending what they took. You recognize them? I asked. He nodded slowly. One of them's on the HOA board. Ted Langston used to run a landscaping company before they shut him down for dumping chemicals near the creek. And the other, Dalton's mouth twitched, pretty sure that's Vanessa Cartwright in a hoodie. I handed him the condemnation notice. They're trying to fabricate a safety violation. No inspection, no warning, just this. Dalton stood. You planning to press charges? Absolutely, he nodded. Then let's get a warrant. The next day, the sheriff's deputies paid a visit to the Pine Hollow HOA office located in a converted bank building just off Route 12. They left with hard drives, internal memos, and Ted Langston in handcuffs. Vanessa wasn't there. According to the receptionist, she was working remotely. That afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Nadine Ramos, attorney with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. We've been investigating Pine Hollow for nearly 8 months, she said. We've received numerous complaints of unlicensed enforcement actions, forged documents, and coercive property claims. Your case may be the final piece we need. I agreed to make a formal statement and sent over all my documentation, including the trail cam footage and zoning confirmations from Alan Givens. By the end of the week, state investigators had frozen Pine Hollow's accounts and suspended all HOA activities pending a full audit. Word spread fast. Turns out I wasn't the only one they'd targeted. A single mom on the south end of the development had been fined over $5,000 for a non-conforming mailbox that matched the county standard. A retired Navy vet had his shed condemned because it had a non-neutral paint tone. Both had paid under threat of lien. Now they were reclaiming every penny. And Vanessa Cartwright, she finally resurfaced on the 6 o'clock news, being escorted from a gated residence in handcuffs, her mouth tight with disbelief as reporters swarmed. I stood in my cabin doorway that evening, sipping coffee as the pine trees rustled in the breeze. Justice didn't always come knocking. Sometimes, you had to drag it through the mud and force it to look around. But when it finally arrived, it felt damn good. 3 weeks later, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail, addressed in tight block lettering. No return address. Inside was a single glossy photo, a close-up of a security camera mine smashed and dangling by its cable. Underneath, scrawled in red marker, "You're not untouchable." I didn't flinch. I'd already expected the fallout to get uglier. The state had frozen the HOA's assets, yes, but the board members hadn't all gone quietly. Vanessa's arrest had been the first domino, not the last. With her gone, a power vacuum formed, and the remaining board members began pointing fingers in every direction but their own. Meanwhile, residents of Pine Hollow started digging. What they uncovered was worse than even I had guessed. I drove into town the next day and met with Nadine Ramos again, this time in a quiet corner of the county courthouse. She had a tablet open on the table, screen filled with scanned documents and internal emails. They were laundering member dues, she said in a low voice. A separate account created under a shell nonprofit, over $80,000 funneled through in the past year alone. I leaned in. And no one noticed. They used dummy invoices, landscaping upgrades that never happened, playground resurfacing with no permit applications. The checks were real, the work wasn't. I let out a slow breath. "Anyone else charged yet?" "Not yet," she said. "But we've got enough for indictments on at least 3 more board members, maybe more after the forensic audit finishes." I nodded toward the tablet. "You need anything else from me?" She slid over a small envelope. "Just this. You'll want to see it." Inside were stills from a security feed, one I didn't recognize. It showed 2 figures in a storage room, one of them clearly Ted Langston, the other a woman with a clipboard. The timestamp placed it 3 days before the break-in at my cabin. "Where is that?" I asked. "HOA's off-site storage," she said. "We raided it last night. Found dozens of altered property surveys, fake citations, and at least 6 blank condemnation notices signed by Vanessa." She was preparing to take more properties. "Anyone else up here they were planning to hit? 3 more parcels," she said. "One owned by a retired teacher. 2 others belonging to absentee landowners. You were just the first test run." I stood up. "I'll talk to the others. Make sure they know what's coming." Outside, the air was thick with the scent of warm pine and distant smoke. I drove back up the mountain, taking the long route through a fire road that hadn't seen use in years. Halfway up, I spotted a new sign nailed to a tree. "Pine Hollow Security Patrol Authorized Vehicles Only." I pulled over, yanked it down, and tossed it into the truck bed. There was no patrol, just a bluff. But it meant someone still thought they could enforce control up here. By the time I made it back to the cabin, 2 sheriff's cruisers were parked by the gate. Deputies Jameson and Burke were already outside, talking to a man in a blue windbreaker. Burke turned as I approached. "Mr. Mallory, this here's Agent Lawrence, State Bureau." Lawrence offered his hand. "We need to talk. You got a minute?" I nodded and led them into the cabin. "We have a situation," Lawrence said, once seated. "Your name came up in connection with a missing file from the HOA's internal server." I raised an eyebrow. "Missing how?" "We've traced a data breach to a remote access point 2 days after the warrant was executed. Someone accessed the backup logs and deleted over 30 documents mostly related to land acquisitions." "And you think I did it?" He shook his head. "No. We think whoever did it wanted to make sure you didn't find out what they had planned next." Jameson leaned forward. "We're looking into a man named Mason Kell. He was listed as consultant on HOA filings, but we think he was running an off-books operation to acquire rural land through coercion and resell it to developers under LLCs." Burke pulled out a manila folder. "He's ex-military intelligence, dishonorably discharged. Last known address was a P.O. box in Temecula." Lawrence added, "We believe he was the one who drafted the fake zoning maps. He's not officially on record anywhere, but his fingerprints are all over the formatting, language, and metadata." I crossed my arms. "So what now?" "We need to flush him out," Lawrence said. "And we think he'll come back for the rest of the files. We want to use your property as part of a sting." I raised both eyebrows. "You're asking me to set a trap?" "No," he said. "We're asking you to be bait." I didn't answer right away. Outside, the breeze stirred the trees like they were whispering secrets to each other. "Only if I get to wire the cameras myself," I said finally. "And I want a copy of everything you find." They agreed. Over the next 4 days, I converted the cabin into a fortress. Not with weapons, but with information. Motion sensors lined the perimeter, microphones hidden in the rafters, and a double backup server in the storm shelter beneath the floorboards. The trail cam footage had taught me one thing: never rely on just one angle. On the 5th night, someone tripped the motion alarm at the south fence line at exactly 2:37 in the morning. No vehicle, no lights, just the faint crunch of boots on gravel. I stayed inside. The signal went to the sheriff's mobile unit a mile down the hill. Deputies were already moving. The figure reached the back door, knelt, and pulled out a small black box signal jammer. But it was too late. The cameras had already sent footage to 3 different servers. By the time he made it inside, 6 deputies surrounded the cabin and ordered him down at gunpoint. It wasn't Kell. It was the HOA's former treasurer, a man named Spencer Hale. Lawrence arrived 20 minutes later, pale and tight-lipped. "We just found something in his truck. 3 sets of forged property titles. Yours, the retired teacher's, and a parcel owned by a family that moved out of state last year." "Who signed them?" I asked. "Vanessa," he said. "Dated 2 months ago. But here's the kicker. They were notarized by someone who's been dead since March." The pieces were snapping together. Someone had been preparing to take over land through false ownership claims, using fake notaries and intimidation tactics to push people off. They'd started with the ones least likely to fight back, but they hadn't expected me. 2 weeks later, the state charged 6 individuals with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, racketeering, and falsification of legal documents. Vanessa's charges were upgraded to include attempted unlawful seizure of property and obstruction of justice. Spencer Hale, facing over a dozen years in prison, cut a deal and turned over everything. That included a USB drive hidden inside a flashlight, containing full blueprints of the HOA's land expansion scheme. I attended the hearing in a dark gray jacket and watched as the judge read out the charges. Vanessa didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, lips pressed so tight they were nearly white. Outside the courthouse, a reporter caught up to me. "Mr. Mallory, what would you say to the people who still think HOAs are just harmless neighborhood groups?" I looked at him, then at the camera. "I'd say some of them are. Some of them care. But when the wrong people get control, they stop being neighbors and start playing king. The difference is, out here, we don't do crowns." That night, I sat on the porch of my cabin, a thick legal envelope in my lap. Inside were the official statements from the state, verifying once and for all that my property was never part of any HOA, never had been, and never would be. I didn't need the paper to know that. but it felt good to hold it just the same. The courthouse hallway was quiet, but there was a pressure in the air like the hour before a thunderstorm. I sat on the bench outside courtroom 3, flipping through the subpoena packet Nadine had handed me that morning. Inside were printed transcripts, financial ledgers, and something new, a deposition from a man named Garrett Blevins, former security contractor for Pine Hollow HOA. I hadn't heard of him before. According to the file, he'd worked under a subcontract agreement written up by Vanessa herself. His statement described late-night compliance sweeps, property checks on homes that were never given notice, and a quiet order to disable all visible monitoring equipment before stepping onto any land targeted for conversion. I turned the page and froze. The name wasn't familiar, but the address was. It was mine, listed under a March entry marked for quiet seizure trial run verify access vulnerability. I looked up as the door opened. Nadine stepped out, flanked by a woman in a dark blue blazer and a man with silver hair and a federal badge clipped to his belt. "Andrew," she said, walking quickly. "We've got a development." The woman beside her introduced herself as Special Agent Dana Holloway, Department of Justice, Organized Crime Task Force. The man was U.S. Attorney Marshall Creeley. Agent Holloway spoke first. "We've been tracking a pattern tied to fraudulent land seizure attempts across 3 counties. Your case triggered a deeper look. What we've found goes past misuse of HOA authority. This was a coordinated real estate laundering scheme." Creeley handed me another file. Inside were maps, all marked with red pins, each one tied to a property like mine, rural, off-grid, or owned by absentee landlords. Dozens of them. "These seizures weren't just about expanding HOA boundaries," Holloway said. "They were filtering the assets through a series of shell LLCs, flipping them at inflated prices to developers who were either in on the scheme or willfully blind." I nodded slowly. "And Vanessa," Creeley's expression flattened. "She wasn't the top, she was an operator." "The man we believe to be the principal is Mason Kell. He built the LLC web and coordinated the movement of funds. He's been active in 4 states under various aliases." I stared at the map. "You find him yet?" "Almost," Holloway said. "We've got a sealed indictment ready. We're waiting for confirmation he's inside the state before we move. In the meantime, we're proceeding with full federal charges against the Pine Hollow board." The courtroom door opened again. The bailiff called us in. I took my seat at the witness stand, gave my oath, and began answering questions. This time, there was no hesitation. I laid out the timeline, the documentation, and the break-in. I explained how the fake condemnation notice had been used to gain unlawful access to my cabin. I described the missing items and the security footage. The judge listened without interruption. Then Vanessa's attorney began cross-examining. He tried to paint the situation as a misunderstanding, a paperwork error spiraled out of control by overzealous volunteers. "You're saying," he asked, "that Mrs. Cartwright personally orchestrated a criminal conspiracy to take your land using forged documents and unauthorized searches?" "She signed the paperwork," I said calmly. "She ordered the entry. She changed the locks, and she didn't just do it to me. She did it to others. You've got the files." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the judge leaned forward. "Counsel, unless you have contradictory evidence, move on." The rest of the trial moved quickly. The prosecution presented Hale's recorded confession, the flash drive with the forged title documents, and the testimony from Garrett Blevins, which sealed the board's fate. When the verdict was read, Vanessa didn't look up. Her hands rested on the table, fingers clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and unlawful seizure of property. She'd be eligible for parole after 8, but her license to operate in any real estate capacity was revoked for life. 3 more board members were convicted that same week. The HOA was officially dissolved by court order. The assets, including the HOA office building, company vehicles, and remaining funds, were auctioned off to pay restitution to victims. I received a check not large, but symbolic, along with an official letter of apology from the state's Attorney General's office. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. In the weeks that followed, Pine Hollow changed. The signs came down. The security patrols stopped. Residents began organizing community potlucks free of bureaucracy. The single mom with the mailbox fine planted a vegetable garden where the old HOA sign used to stand. The retired Navy vet who'd had his shed condemned rebuilt it with help from neighbors. I kept mostly to myself, but I noticed something different when I came down the mountain for supplies. People waved. They stopped to ask how things were going up at the cabin. One even asked if I'd consider running for the new community council they were planning, non-binding, volunteer-based. I told them I'd think about it. One afternoon, I got a call from Nadine. "Mason Kell's in custody," she said. "Picked him up outside Flagstaff trying to board a private plane with a fake passport. He'll be extradited back to face charges in your case and several others." I asked what the maximum sentence could be. 30 years, she said. And he's facing civil suits from every property owner he tried to defraud. I thanked her and hung up, then walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the deck. I leaned against the railing, watching the last light fade over the trees. The air was quiet, not just silent but settled, like something had finally clicked back into place. I thought about my father, about the days we'd spent building this cabin from the ground up. I remembered the smell of sawdust and cedar, the way he'd said, "This land's got roots. You protect it, it'll protect you right back." He'd been right. I didn't just protect the land. I protected the idea that no one, not a board, not a title, not a fake president, could take what didn't belong to them. Later that evening, I opened the drawer in the kitchen and pulled out the folder where I kept the deed. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt good to hold it again, like shaking hands with a promise fulfilled. I placed it back, locked it up, and poured myself a glass of bourbon. Outside, the wind shifted. The pines creaked gently, like they were settling in for the night, and for the first time in a long while I did too.